Everyone's got that one game from their childhood that they hold in high regard to this day, regardless whether or not it still holds up. For me, that game is the cult classic PS2 game, War of the Monsters. I found this gem of a game way back in the days of video game rental stores because the cover art stood out to me so much that little 10-year-old me got it on a whim, and I firmly believe that that's the only good choice I've made in my lifetime. I mean, look at this. Maybe one of the coolest video game box arts, if not the hardest image in general ever made by human hands. The game to this day has an unrivaled aesthetic that's wholly unique to itself and pioneered a lot of really unique gameplay mechanics for its time. It's kind of a niche title that only a handful of people played, but one that's still fondly remembered by those who did play it back in the day. Searching online for this game yields forum posts of people who talk about this game as one of the best of their childhoods, and I agreed with that statement and wanted to take a more in-depth look at it. Why exactly do people still fondly remember and talk about this game 20 years later? As an excuse to replay one of my favorite games, I decided to get to the bottom of that, and thus I'm going to be doing this retrospective, combing over the aesthetics, gameplay, and maybe some fun behind-the-scenes trivia of this obscure 2-decade-old PS2 Kaiju fighter. So without further ado, let's take a look at the absolute classic that is War of the Monsters. Also, hey, you'd be doing me a monstrous favor by hitting the subscribe and like button on this video. Alright, now back to the video. War of the Monsters was a 2003 fighting game developed by a small but very ambitious team from the now defunct Incognito Entertainment, developers behind the early Twisted Metal series, and published by Sony for a little console you might have heard of called the PlayStation 2. The idea behind the game was to make a game about giant monsters fighting each other in destructible environments, which aspects of those could be used as weapons, and it evolved from there. Since there wasn't any other game like it at the time, they had to get creative at problem solving. As quoted by producer Dylan Job, it was a risky development cycle, but very rewarding. Allegedly, Sony wanted them to make a licensed Godzilla game, but they didn't want the team at Incognito to change many aspects about it. In essence, they would have been very confined in many ways in terms of design, and many of the core ideas, notably the use of cars and rubble, as weaponry wouldn't fly with Sony, so they decided to decline the offer, and instead decided to use more Western-based creatures and create their own unique style of gameplay. The team that did go on to make the Godzilla game was actually inspired by War of the Monsters after they played it at that year's E3, so much so that they basically went back to the drawing board from their initial demo, which I just think is very funny. Starting up this game, it hits you with this extremely stylish intro cutscene inspired by 50s and 60s horror movies, showing how we got giant monster WWE in the first place. Aliens attack Earth, and we combat them by creating force field orbs which short-circuit the flying saucers and knock them out of the sky. However, this victory is short-lived as mutagenic fuels from the saucers make their way to Earth, mutating the local creatures and causing them to grow in size, gain sentience, and other fun, campy B-movie style things. Not Shakespeare in terms of story, but it works as a fun setup and really fits the retro feel of the game. The game's aesthetic is heavily based on creature features, kaiju movies, and sci-fi films, and the roster of playable monsters pays homage to many of the greats. This overall aesthetic is one of the biggest draws of the game and the thing that I think makes it stand out the most. I don't think many other games have this kind of charm to them, and all of it is so well done. I firmly believe it's because they leaned so hard into this unique aesthetic that the game is so memorable to this day. He states that Owen Richardson, one of the artists for the game, did a lot of the concept art for it and really did a great job at bringing it all to life. Even the menu and loading screens are stylish, modeled after a drive-in movie and classic movie theater posters respectively. They just bring that extra visual charm to the game. It's things like that which make all the difference in my opinion. It turns what would be an ordinary loading screen into something eye-catching and unique. To this day, the loading screens have existed rent-free in my head, and that's just because they all have such flair to them. Also, fun fact, the loading screens were also hand-painted by Owen Richardson. And if any of the War of the Monsters team sees this video and wants to send me any of those, my DMs are open and I would be eternally grateful. But man are these cool. The rest of the tone of the game is equally as fitting, with everything being bombastic and over the top. From the score to the design of the monsters and the levels, it all just feels larger than life, which makes sense when you're trying to design a game about giant monsters beating the piss out of each other. Speaking of the monsters, those are all visually extremely cool as well and have such fun, varied designs, with some designs ranging from wholly unique to others edging IP infringement. There are 8 playable ones off the bat, with 2 bonus ones unlockable later. Each monster even has 4 bonus cosmetic costumes unlockable using the tokens earned in-game. We have the obvious nods with
Monkey,
Toho Don't Sue Me, as well as Praetor as an homage to them. We can't forget the giant mechs with the classic American military-inspired Robo-47, which is essentially the Iron Giant if he could shoot nuclear warheads, and the Japanese-inspired Ultra V, which is most likely a nod to Mazinger Z. There's Agamo, who's a sentient stone statue with a flaming head, who actually has a cosmetic of Sweet Tooth if you have a save file for Twisted Metal due to the team's earlier work being the Twisted Metal series. Magmo, which is a 4-armed sentient lava monster that kinda reminds me of Forearms from Ben 10. And maybe my favorite and most unique monster is Kineticlops, which is a Cyclops made out of an eyeball suspended by electricity. Honestly, one of the coolest monster designs in the game. Those are all the base monsters, with 2 unlockable ones being Raptoros, which is quite literally just a dragon, and Zorgulon, which resembles the aliens from Mars Attacks. I absolutely love the roster of characters here. They're all so visually distinct, and I think that contributes to why they're so unique and memorable. Each of these monsters has unique stats, combos, movesets, as well as special attacks that do different things, which is a great segue to talk about the gameplay. So as mentioned, each monster has unique stats, combos, movesets, and special attacks. Think of this game being similar to a classic 2D fighter but in 3D space. Just like traditional fighters, you've got heavy attacks, light attacks, grapples, counters, and special moves, which can be done with specific button inputs. And since the fights take place in a 3D space, each map can have up to 4 monsters at a time, and it's not always a 1v1. Generally, the games play out in a free-for-all format, making it an extremely fun clusterfuck party game or a fairly good traditional fighter. The game is at its best as a multiplayer game to goof around with your friends, similar to something like Smash Bros. War of the Monsters actually pioneered this really unique multiplayer feature where the camera is split when the players are far away, but merges into a single player camera when they come close together. The core idea behind the game's development, and quite possibly the biggest draw in terms of gameplay, is the fully destructible environments that you fight in. Almost every part of the map can be demolished, yielding hidden power-ups and rubble that you can use for melee weapons or to throw at opponents. The standout ones being the gasoline trucks, which explode into long-lasting flames that damage enemies over time, and the radio towers, which impale opponents, stunning them for a few seconds, allowing you to get a few extra hits in. This obscure little game was actually one of the first games to implement these ideas, which I think is super cool, and to this day I think it might be the best implementation since. In addition to all of that, there's environmental triggers that can happen when you do specific things in some of the maps, such as pestering this UFO until it causes a tsunami. I don't know why, but destructible environments in video games have always just slapped my brain with a hit of dopamine every time I see it. It's just satisfying to watch a building crumble as you throw an enemy through it. Early PS2 games were big on this idea, and to this day it's still one of my favorite mechanics to see added to games. These environments aren't just for show either. Depending on the size of the building, some can straight up crush your opponent for some extra cheesy kills during gameplay, and the verticality of the buildings allow for some fun mix-ups during combat. All of the maps really are aesthetically pleasing for a PS2 game, and they have a surprising amount of detail. There's traffic desperately trying to avoid your giant monster ass cheeks from crushing them, same with crowds of pedestrians running around, which can actually be squished by walking over them. All of this happens in real time. The buildings, while big, can usually be taken out with a few heavy attacks, which all culminate in truly giving the player a sense of scale and making the monsters feel huge, which is something I don't often feel in video games. Apart from the deathmatch mode, there's also some fun unlockable minigames, an endurance mode where you fight enemies until you die, and more interestingly, the adventure mode, which is loosely speaking the story mode for the game, which I wanted to go over in a little more detail. The adventure mode for the game goes in a level-by-level format where you pick a monster and run through 11 levels fighting all of the monsters in the game, along with some boss fights scattered throughout. This is honestly a great showcase of all of the maps in the game, as well as a taste of each of the monsters and what they can do. The boss fights, while sometimes kind of tedious, are a neat way to shake up the standard gameplay, and I absolutely love the designs of all of the bosses. And at the end, as a neat little bonus, you get a fun origin cutscene of each of the monsters, minus the unlockable too. Running through the basic plot of the game, it starts with Day of the Colossus, where you fight Congar in Midtown Park, a New York-inspired map, followed by Revenge of Torgera, where you fight, you guessed it, Torgera, followed by Robo 47, backed up by the US Army at Gambler's Gulch, a Las Vegas-inspired map. After that, the player monster heads to Rosedale Canyon, inspired by Area 51, in the level Outpost X, where you fight mutated ants, followed by the first boss, Goliath Prime, which is essentially a sentient Beyblade. Next, the player must defeat a reanimated Mecha Congar and Praetor in a 2v1 in the Creeping Chaos at Metro City, the largest map in the game. The next level, It Came From the Skies, is yet another 2v1 where you have to fight dual Raptoros in Century Airfield. Following that is Battle for Atomic Island. Based on 3 Mile Island, the player must defeat several Kineticlops while destroying cooling towers until the reactor explodes, causing the island to become a crater, spawning the second boss, Vagon, which is this giant Venus flytrap. I like that Vagon's inclusion in this area was possibly an intended pun, as it's a plant in a power plant. Very clever. In Battle of the Titans, you fight 2 more Robo 47s, which begs the question, how many of these things is the government sitting on? Did they just mass produce them? Fun fact, since this level is based on San Francisco, it's also on a fault line, which you can actually cause an earthquake, which I didn't know until doing research for this video. After that, in Terror in Paradise, you go to Club Caldera, a tropical resort themed level, where you stumble upon Magmo and Agmo fighting, who then decide to Avengers team up to kick your ass. Defeating them, we move on to Destroyer Wave, where we fight 2 Ultra Vs in Sunopolis, a Japan-inspired map where upon defeating them, we're abducted by aliens for the penultimate level, Terror in Space. We're beamed up to the alien mothership, which might be the only bad level in the game, where we fight 3 Zorgulon and upon defeating them, it causes the ship to explode, crash landing on the final level, Capitol, which is modeled after the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool and the Capitol building. Here's where we fight the alien leader, Cerebellon, Cerebulon? Destroyer of Worlds, who is so cool that he gets the entire level named after him. This is a 3-phase fight where he starts off in a slow-moving mech that does a lot of damage, followed by a second stage where he moves slightly faster and obtains unlimited power and tries to shock you to death, ending off on his squid brain form, which is really fast and will combo you into the ground faster than it takes speed to pronounce his name. Have fun getting stun-locked, nerd. Upon defeating his final form, his head explodes and out crawls an even smaller version of him, who we scare off by loudly yelling at it. The whole adventure mode can be completed in about 40 minutes, so it doesn't drag on or overstay its welcome. It's a fun little adventure that you can speedrun through if you have the urge to play some single-player beat-em-ups. As I said before, it's a great showcase of all the levels and monsters in the game, and while the bosses are mostly tedious, they at least bring some neat variation to the gameplay and are extremely fun to look at. So that's all of the actual content in the game, but why is it so fondly remembered after all of these years? Well, it might be nostalgia talking, but it's a fun little game made by a small team that captured lightning in a bottle and made something incredibly special. So special, in fact, that it's remained in the minds of those who have played it for years. It had some of the most innovative and unique gameplay concepts for its time, and honestly, I still have an absolute blast loading it up and playing for an hour or two. The presentation and aesthetic are absolutely unrivaled to this day, and I don't think there's ever been anything else like it. It's a game that oozes style and personality in every aspect of it, and it really shows the passion and love that the devs put into making it and bringing their vision to life. It's an inspiring story of a group of developers who had an idea and used their creativity to make something never before seen. It was poorly marketed at the time and was a bit of an oddball game to try and sell, as it didn't follow many of the established conventions for games, but despite all of that, a great number of people online claim that it's their favorite game. In interviews with creative director Kellen Hatch, he states that he still meets people in his new job in the archaeological field that remember the game and say that it's one of their favorites, which he states is the ultimate reward for any creative endeavor. In another timeline, I would have loved to see another of these made, especially with what games are capable of doing nowadays, and while there was talks of a sequel, nothing ever came of it and the studio did eventually dissolve, with most of the team going on to other studios, but for a brief moment, these talented people came together to create the kind of game that they wanted to make, and we got something truly special. Thank you all so much for watching. Roll the outro. Hey, thanks so much for watching until the end of the video. If you enjoyed this, liking and subscribing helps me a ton and I would appreciate it a lot. Let me know what you guys thought about this format. I love diving into obscure games I played as a child and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. If you've got any games like that you've played, let me know in the comments. I always love discussing niche video game topics when I can, and who knows, maybe it'll come up in a later video. I've got one more idea cooking similar to this one about a Resident Evil clone that's mixed with the movie The Thing, but we'll see if I get around to making that. If you want to see more of my content, I'll have playlists in the description along with my socials if you want to check out any of that, the Twitter, Discord server, etc. If you really like my content, you want to support what I do here, there's a Patreon link too where you can get your name in the credits, as well as early access to videos and periodic input on video ideas, but no pressure, I'm just happy that you watched this. Speaking of patrons, a huge thank you to NDH for your support. You help me continue to make these silly videos, and I appreciate that a lot. Thank you all once again for watching, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.